So it's time for Ask the Don, where you guys send your mountain bike skills related questions in to our social media, our Facebook page, our Twitter, our Instagram, and I try and answer those questions. So it's a bumper edition, this one. We've got loads of questions, so I'll crack on. The first one comes from Ben Thompson, and he says, should I try riding clips? I've always been a flat pedal man. I guess, Ben, there's no sort of right or wrong answer to that, but I can tell you from my experience, I rode flat pedals and raced on flat pedals downhill for 15 years, and I've now spent the last 5 years probably 90% on clips. I would say there is a bit of a learning curve. They're not the easiest things to get used to, and I would say I actually went backwards for a few months when I learned to ride clips, because you just can't get out quite as quick, and I was finding that I would just wash out the front wheel and land on my knee, whereas if I was on flat pedals I could have dabbed a bit easier. So like I said, there's no right or wrong answer, but they do take a little bit of learning. Personally now, I don't go back and ride flat pedals very often because it feels like you just push. You don't get any of that spin in circles. So if I'm going out and I'm riding jumps and I'm not really that bothered about pedaling, flats feel great. They feel a lot of fun. However, if I'm riding any distance, I find it really frustrating riding flat pedals now. This one comes from Nathan Scott, and he says, when leaning the bike during cornering, is your weight applied purely on the outside pedal and your forward chest head position, or should I also be pushing down on the outside grip? I'm finding that I wash out the front end a fair bit, but I think that's because I'm leaning the bike over and my weight automatically goes to my inside grip. It's a tough one to answer this. I'll try and simplify things. And I always think about my weight as my hips. And although when I'm coaching people how to lean the bike over in corners, I do tell them to pick their outside elbow up to get the bike leant over. Really in practice, all I'm thinking about is my hips. So my hips are coming to the outside of the bike, and that does automatically weight that outside foot, but I'm not really thinking about my hands, my grips, anything like that. But it's quite a common thing to wash out on the front wheel, and to make sure you've got enough grip on that front tyre, I'll go back to the basics. Check your fork sag, check your tyre pressure, make sure your bar height is at the right spot so you're trying to weight both wheels equally so you're not hanging the weight off the back of the bike, so that does slide first. And then really think about where you're getting your hips and getting them to the outside of the bike. If you're still washing out, then I would just lower my chest slightly to the bars, but it's got to feel natural. If you're really forcing it, then I would say your bike setup isn't quite right. One from Fluffy on Twitter, and he says, how do you progress in mountain biking if your gear isn't good? Example, I have a 100mm travel hardtail, which is £300. I think it's holding me back. I would say there's a lot to be said for just riding whatever bike you've got and riding it a lot. Yeah, it might not be the lightest, strongest, fastest bike ever, but you'll still be learning really fast. And a lot of the pros spent a good few years on hardtails learning the basics of mountain biking before they even got a nice fancy bike. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. As long as it's not breaking on you, then just keep riding. One from Philip Zurich, and he says, any ways to stop and prevent lower back pain? I get it mostly when climbing. That is a really common thing that I hear. So I would start with bike setup. Start with your saddle height, get it in the right spot, not too high, not too low. You should have a slight bit of bend in your knee when your foot's right at the bottom of the stroke. From there, I would then go on to handlebars and try and get them in a comfortable position. I don't think with mountain biking we can really use the same sort of things they use on road bike for bike fits, but it is still about getting the things in the right particular area, and especially for the style of riding you do. I run a really short stem, good for going downhill. But it's all about saddle and bars, making sure that's comfortable. And then, to be honest, it's a case of just riding more. It's definitely those muscles, your bum and your back muscles, that you use a lot, especially when you're climbing. And the more you use them, the less they'll hurt. Aaron Frenny says, how important are good tyres? I would say, personally for me, they're really important. Tyres are always compromised. You either get a really grippy tyre or you get a really fast rolling tyre, and it's trying to work out what you prefer. I've always erred on the side of having a really grippy tyre, so I'm really confident with it, and try and maybe use my fitness to make up for the lack of rolling resistance, or should I say the more rolling resistance, the slower tyre. And it's also about getting a strong enough tyre for your weight and how hard you ride. So I probably ride quite aggressively, so I don't mind carrying a little bit more weight on the tyres just so I don't puncture them. But for me, tyres are really important. Michael Topping says, is 26 dead? Yeah. This one comes from Joe Page, and she says, what are the most important tips and the best way to explain them to complete novices who come out, sit down, drag one foot nearer the floor than the other? It's a tough one, but there's a few things I would start with. Getting the right footwear is really important, so you've got a lot of grip on the pedal. So a skate style shoe, even if it's not a mountain bike shoe, is really good. And then it's all about getting stood up, feet level, nice and tall, and then moving the weight around the bike and that arc of movement. Also, one finger braking and moving slightly back on the bike when stopping. A good way of showing people how to do that is take them somewhere where it's rough, so it's really uncomfortable to sit down. That'll get people standing up and also up on 2 feet. But it's definitely something I see a lot of, is absolute novices want to sit down and they feel safer with 1 foot nearer the floor than the next. So go somewhere slightly rough where that's not going to be comfortable. Also, actually just have a go at braking, and you can show people that you'll be able to stop much quicker if you just drop the weight slightly back on the bike. This one comes from Matt Stevens. He says, how do the pros train to keep their skills to the peak? I would say, racing is a massive part of that. The pros will race a lot in the summer. So just putting yourself to the test every weekend is a really good way of getting faster. Also, a lot of the pro downhillers will have trainers, and actually they probably ride their bikes slightly less than you think. They'll race every weekend, but they maybe don't ride so much in the week. They'll spend more time on a road bike and in the gym, training and then resting and then just racing at the weekends. So there you go, that's it for this edition of Ask the Don. Thanks for sending in all your questions. It's really good to get them. You can send them in all the time via our Twitter, that's at GMBN Tweet, or our Facebook page, Global Mountain Bike Network. If I've not answered yours, maybe we've done it already, so you can click up here for our other Ask the Don editions, or you can click down there for our skills playlist. But if you found this video useful, give us a big thumbs up down below. And click on me to subscribe to the channel.